So, I want to talk to you about this episode of Millionaire Matchmaker. I think I have not seen a single other episode of this series except for this one episode, and I have seen it 40 ish times at this point because I've used it to teach, to show other instructors. I'll talk a little bit about how I came to use this in my classes a little bit later. But let's start with what's important, which is talking about the individuals in the show. So I'm not going to talk about the actual woman in charge of being the millionaire matchmaker or her assistants or the guy who gets upset and storms out of the sit-down dinner that they have. I want to talk about the sort of four main characters, the two people that are millionaires who are there to date others, and the two people they go on a date with. So we've got Doug, who is just terrible, right? Like, if you think about what sort of life or person or character you would wish upon your child, or to what extent you would go to prevent your child to being like Doug, oh my goodness, quite a bit, right? It's not just that I don't want my child to be cursed with a life where they grow up in a famine-stricken country and they're watching their friends die, and I mean, that's a bad life. I might choose Doug's life over that, but Doug's life is also really bad, and I would go to great lengths to try and prevent my child from being Doug. And if I could wish a bad outcome on my worst enemy, being Doug, having children who are like Doug, that would be a pretty damning result for my worst enemy to have to endure. So let's talk about like what's so weird about Doug. Like, just evaluate him, and like what is, when you're watching this episode, you find, or we find, so reprehensible. Some positives, right? So he's eco-friendly. He runs an eco-friendly business and life. He's very successful at business, or at least seems to be so, although I really suspect that he is living off of his parents' money. He's healthy and in shape. He seems like he really takes care of himself, but that's about it. Now I've run out of good things to say about him. This is just to say the obvious that they keep mentioning in the episode. He's shallow, superficial, narcissistic, self-absorbed, self-righteous, right? So there's a way in which it really indicts and undermines the praise I offer him about being eco-friendly in his business and life, that it really seems like he's just doing it so he can lord it over other people and feel self-righteous and about himself, better about himself than others. He's unable to recognize other people. Solipsistic. So solipsistic is this word, it's a position in philosophy. So we worry about the problem of what we call the problem of other minds. How do you know that other people are conscious beings, right? You can observe their behavior, but maybe they're just unconscious automatons and you're the only conscious person in the world. The problem of other minds gets really worrisome when we start trying to extend the question to animals. Are other animals, cats, dogs, insects, robots, artificial intelligence? At what point do we ascribe them a conscious inner life? Solipsism is the worry or the position, but usually the worry, because people generally don't hold it. It's just a fictitious philosopher you're trying to answer who's posing this objection. The solipsist is posing the objection. All you see is the external behavior of other human beings, other animals, other artificial intelligence. How do you know that they have an inner life and that you're not the only conscious person in the world? So to be solipsistic is to think that is to be the only person in the world. So, I mean, I'm being metaphorical here because I don't think Doug holds the philosophical position of solipsism. I don't think Doug holds any philosophical position, but it's like it has this feel of solipsism, that he only recognizes himself and is completely blind to the fact that other people exist. He is uninterested in other people. I do not see any sign or hint of his interest in understanding or coming to know or asking questions. I mean, that sit-down dinner he has with group of people. It's all of the other people asking him about himself, and he has no interest in the other people present. Even on his date, I feel like he's not interested in David. He's dumb. This comes through most clearly towards the end of the episode, where the millionaire matchmaker is questioning him about why he pressed David not to order the steak, I think, and Doug says something like, well, red meat is bad, it comes from red animals. Again, he was so self-confident, so condescending towards David when he pushed David to not order the steak and say, like, oh, well, everybody knows that that's just terrible to do. Why would you order red meat? And then he has fucking no idea what he's talking about when someone presses him on it. And no interest in figuring it out. As far as I can tell, he has zero curiosity. He's empty-headed. His personality seems like just this empty, gaping void. I can't imagine. There's times on the date, and this might be editing on the part of the reality TV. Again, maybe Doug's not this terrible because, who knows how reality TV cuts the episode to make people be portrayed. But, these long silences with awkward silences because Doug has just no personality, and on the date David's trying his best to make things run well, but it's really hard when you're dealing with somebody who just has nothing going on. I find, other than being interested in his business and himself, he's just got nothing, no interesting thoughts or creativity or depths of personality that you'd want to get into. He's just nothing. He's unable to recognize his own flaws and be self-reflective. I think there's at some point where someone says, "What's your worst flaw?" and he's like, "I don't think I have any. I don't know what that could possibly be. Ask me what my flaws are. I'll go on for a half hour." Lastly, I have on my list here, misrepresents others through his own lens of narcissism. I mean, there's that point where he's talking with the millionaire matchmaker's assistant, and the assistant is saying, "Man, this is going really badly. This is so boring." And Doug is like, No. It's only because you're straight. You don't understand. All of these people are super into me. This is going great. This is just like a complete misperception of what's going on because he can only view things through the lens of his own narcissism. There's another point where, again, the assistant is talking to him after the photo shoot that they interrupt, and I think the assistant says something like, "Do you think you're like the bee's knees, the best thing, like so awesome?" And like Doug mishears him as saying like that's like telling, and Doug says like, "Oh yeah, no, I agree with you. Thank you for the compliment." No, that was a question. I wasn't saying you're amazing. I was asking you if you think you're amazing. So, I mean, Doug is just really a shitty human being in so many ways, and a life that might involve happiness, satisfaction, success, wealth, friends, even like friends in some sort of superficial sense who want to just be around you because you have money and tell you what you want to hear, and so the experience of friend, like the sense of friendship, but not like, I don't, as far as I can tell, not actual friendship. Doug is probably incapable of actual friendship, but nonetheless, a terrible life, and he's a terrible human being, and not something I would be frightened to raise a child to grow up to be like him, and would go to great lengths, not just to keep my child from dying of starvation or living in poverty, but also not being like Doug. All right, so let's move on to Nicole. Also kind of a shitty person, but maybe not as bad. Some positives: eco-friendly business that she's running in life. She's very successful at business. I have no idea what her background is, but I'd be willing to accept that she might be self-made as opposed to just living off of her parents' money. And you know what? Something I really respect about Nicole is how independent she is. How she is I want to say she's self-confident, but I'm going to take that back in a little bit. But there's something about her where there's some element of independence and iconoclasm and like willingness to stand her ground, which I really respect. Now let's talk about the negatives. self-righteous in this, similar to Doug, right? It seems like, again, maybe the eco-friendly business stuff, maybe the way in which she is so brutally honest and challenges people in conversation and is impolite is just a way of her thinking of herself as like, well, I'm better than other people because I'm brutally honest and I'm not constrained by social conventions which make people feel comfortable. I like to challenge people and not try to make people feel comfortable. I think that that's all just a production that she puts on so she can tell herself that she is better than other people. And a lot of this social awkwardness and challenge and making other people feel awkward and being an asshole, I think comes from a position of insecurity that, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but from what little I know, from what little I can base my judgment on, it really seems like maybe she's intentionally screwing up social interactions with people, dates, interactions with others, because if she's like brutally honest and socially impolite and not trying, like she can tell herself that she hasn't failed when other people don't like her relationships fail, people think that she's an asshole, because she can tell herself, well, it's all just because I'm better than them, because I'm not I haven't fallen for the illusion of trying to be polite, or I've been so brutally honest, and that's just puts people off. But you know what? That's the right way to do things. And so when things don't go well in social interactions, that's not my fault. That's their fault. She's a contrarian for the sake of preserving self-respect. Again, I think that like a lot of the ways in which she defines herself and thinks of herself as different, and the way she carries herself to be eco-friendly and brutally honest and challenge people in conversation in socially awkward ways and make people feel awkward and not try to make interactions go well and make people feel uncomfortable. A lot of that seems like she's being contrarian and difficult for the sake of self-respect, for the ability to say, well, I'm different and my way of being different is better, so I understand that I don't really fit in and I don't do well, but that's not my fault, that's the world's fault for not, I don't know, dealing with me because I'm proud and correct. She insults others and belittles others, seemingly, again, out of insecurity. I mean, there's that part where that super awkward part where she's just being a complete dick to the pharmacist, the clinical pharmacist at a hospital, and she's like, do you dish drugs, blah 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 blah, and she's constantly just attacking people in ways that makes them uncomfortable, makes them not know what to say, and then explains to herself, well, you know, I'm better than them, I think. There's the kiss thing, which is awkward. I don't necessarily want to say that anybody on a date is obligated to kiss another person. I do think that there's probably some sort of trauma on her part or some sort of thing going on. I mean, the date was going very well. She liked the guy. She wanted to go on another date with Bruce. I suspect that there's something more there. Again, just another part. I mean, not to blame her, but to say, again, here's just another personality trait, which is something I wouldn't wish that trauma onto my kid or somebody or any, like, that's a bad part of life, that, you know, trauma like that can fuck you up such that you interact with others in a way that's not great. And that seems like that's what's going on in this case. And again, not the sort of life or personality that you would wish on your child, but you might wish on your enemy. Let's talk about good people, right? So it's easy to say, I mean, it's easy to identify the great people in this episode, or at least the ones who are portrayed to be great by the reality television editors who cut the episode to make some people seem like villains and some people feel like good guys. So to make a caveat, I don't know how true this is, but like David, oh my God, right? So he just one of the best character traits that I just find so endearing about him is that he believes the best of people. Like, he's so charitable. Every time Doug is just a complete dick, they cut to David saying like, "Oh, I feel like Doug has his walls up," or "I can see I need to reach out more." And maybe, he's always giving the best interpretation of someone else's actions when the other person is just clearly being an asshole. So like, David has this belief in the best of other people, which is so endearing and positive. He really makes an effort to make conversations and interactions with others work. He's aware and concerned about others in conversation. He's interested. I mean, he's genuinely interested, I think, in the other person when he has a conversation, right? He doesn't just relay everything about himself. He's asking about the other person, and I think he actually wants to hear the answer. It's not just, I'm on a date, I need to like play my role. It seems like he's a person who is interested in other people. He's happy. He's joyful. He's friendly. I mean, he carries himself in this very joyful way, which I love as well. He's courageous to a certain extent, I think. Like the way in which he goes on the hot air balloon ride despite being afraid of heights, right? That's not a major act of courage, but it's something. And he's willing to put himself out there. He's willing to play along. He's like, well, this isn't my thing. I'm afraid of heights. This is not really something I want to do, but I'll go along for the sake of others, for the sake of, and also maybe to challenge myself and like overcome my own fears and that are irrational. Like he has that sort of courage in him. I don't know what to say here. Polite, self-respect. I think one of the points, another point where I really love David was in the very end of the episode when he's talking to the Millionaire Matchmaker and kind of reviewing the date he went on with Doug. He says, my one regret was not ordering the steak and telling Doug to fuck off, right? I think that David has a sense of self-respect and that he might have let that be compromised on the date by giving into Doug's pressure when Doug was sort of imposing himself as like an asshole on him. But like, David recognized that and is like, oh man, I really wish I had stood up for myself. I think that shows a level of self-respect that David has, which I also find admirable. There's another point I figure I lost it on my like list of things I wrote, but like there was a point in the conversation on the sit down dinner when he's talking to Doug, and Doug has just been talking about his business for on and on and on, and at some point David says, well, when you're not out saving the world with your business, what do you do? Right? I mean, David, for example, he's engaging with Doug in conversation and like trying to like make things work, make the conversation work, like push the conversation to a different area. And the way he does it is by complimenting Doug. That is just really good humanship, really skillful, mature social behavior, I find. So, Doug really has... Sorry, David, not Doug. David really seems to have his act together as far as being a human being and navigating human life. Not just social interactions, but also the courage aspect, the self-respect aspect. More than just the fact that he's friendly. Like, there's other aspects that you can see in David's character that seems admirable. Just the joyfulness too. Bruce, I love Bruce too, man. Successful at business. He's actually really witty. And he has a sense of humor. And playfulness. I think he has good timing. There's like a lot of times where for example, Nicole, I think, mispronounces Baroque, and he pauses. He's like, and the way in which he goes back and forth with her in conversation shows a level of like a good sense of timing and humor and conversationalism. He's friendly. He's willing to go out on a ledge to make things work. I don't think the toxic tour was all that terrible of an idea for a first date, but Bruce does. But nonetheless, he goes along with it. He's like, I think that was I don't think that's a good idea, but I'm game. The other person wants to do this. They think this is a good idea. I will give in and play along with what they think is good, and then I will impose my own. I will also try to push my own sense of, I think he plans the dinner date. So it's not that he like gives in totally to what somebody else wants, but he's willing to give the other person some rope and respect their judgment about what to do. He is able to soften socially awkward situations and take them in stride. I think there's a number of times in which Nicole makes things awkward, and then he does a great job of smoothing them over and pushing forward. He makes things work where she's trying to make them not work. The kiss is one example where he just sort of takes it in stride and pushes on. He's not an asshole about it. He doesn't make it weird. He just moves on. I think the editing makes it seem more dramatic and weird, but I think Bruce, in the moment, if we were there, I think Bruce handled it very well. He's polite. He's social. He's a kind of a socialite. This might be an over. I don't know if I can really judge this from what little I saw, but there's a sense that I get as like a philosophy teacher of like a reflective, critical mind. Just to give one example, I think that there's a couple little hints of this throughout, which makes me want to say this about Bruce. But for example, where I think Nicole says she believes that happiness is peace, and then Bruce kind of makes the joke. He's like, well, then why are there two words for it? And then they go on talking about he's as this a combination of the two. You know, he's when she says happiness is peace, he questions it, right? He's ready. His mind is always responding to what's going on around him with a questioning, critical attitude, not in a negative way, but in like a good, skeptical way that makes him a good human being. Like the right sort of way to engage with the world is not just to take it blindly and just accept everything that people say or what goes on around you. It's to think critically about it. And I think his thinking critically, just in general, is why he's able to make that joke. In response to Nicole, when Nicole says happiness is peace, he's like, well, then why are there two words for it? I might be overreading in that just moment, but there was a couple times in the episode where I feel like he displayed a sort of critical mind that I think is a important character trait of a successful human being. And then lastly, I think he goes on a second date with Nicole despite the maybe this isn't a big deal. I mean, I think if David went on a second date with Doug, I would say David doesn't have enough self-respect to turn Doug down. Bruce, he goes on a second date with Nicole. Maybe I shouldn't give him credit for this, even though things were awkward. Ultimately, things don't work out. Okay, great. So, I mean, what I've done here is sort of elaborate my response to these four people. I suspect that you have your own responses to these four people. I suspect you have similar responses, or at the very least, you think that Doug and Nicole are pretty shitty human beings, and David and Bruce are pretty great human beings. Pretty mature, well put together people. So, why did we watch this episode? Why did I just go on this long rant about the character of these different people? Well, if we think about these people and watching this show from the perspective of a utilitarian or even a Kantian ethicist, there's no immorality in this episode. No one lies, cheats, steals. There's no example of people maximizing happiness and minimizing suffering. I mean, it's all pretty neutral stuff. They're all just kind of living. It's not like somebody's making a choice to spend money on. I mean, there is nothing in this episode, I think, really, that the utilitarian or the Kantian can say is vulnerable to moral judgment, objective moral judgment. Everything they do, like, there's nothing to say that any of these people are good or bad. There's really no way to rate these people on the scale of objective moral goodness or badness. So what the hell were we just doing when I say that Doug and Nicole are bad, David and Bruce are good, and then I start listing all the positive and negative traits? Because the utilitarian and the Kantian have nothing to say. The virtue ethicist wants to say, so this is the third moral theory, there actually is a lot of important moral things going on in this episode, and all the stuff we just said are actually really moral issues, objective moral issues about whether somebody is a good or bad human being, whether they have good human character or bad human character, whether they're succeeding at human life or failing at human life. It seems like Doug is failing at human life. It seems like David and Bruce are succeeding at human life, that they have the character of being successful human beings, whereas Doug has got bad character, and to whatever extent that he's achieving wealth and happiness seems by luck. The virtue ethicist is going to evaluate these people and think that there actually is some moral discussion to have here, some moral evaluation to make of these people. So the virtue ethicist is going to say the Kantian and the utilitarian are wrong, right? There's more to ethics than just maximizing happiness and minimizing suffering. There's more to ethics than just respecting other people and in the way of not lying, cheating, and stealing from them. what's important in ethics is having a good character, being a good human being. That involves not being a rapist, which is a failure of character, immaturity. If we watch the episode about they're going to be we're going to have the sort of similar response as we do to Doug. They're going to seem immature. They're going to seem insecure. We can talk about how their character traits, they're all sort of fucked up, right? That's what the virtue ethicist wants to say ethics is about. That it's about human character and succeeding as a human being. So let me defend the opposite view, because I am a Kantian, so I do think that there is no moral content to my criticizing Doug and praising David and Bruce. So what am I doing when I evaluate them and say Doug's a piece of shit and David and Bruce are great? I mean, I think that what I'm doing is it's a matter of my taste. You know, I like chocolate ice cream. I don't like vanilla ice cream. There's a sort of people I think are admirable, and there's sort of people I'm sort of disgusted by. It's somewhat cultural. It's relative. I mean, I would say that this is not a matter of objective morality, that there is evaluations that we make of people which are relative and cultural and personal and matters of taste and subjective. And I think that that's what's going on when I have the disgust reaction to Doug and the admiration response to David and Bruce. That it's just a matter of taste, personal value, not something objective. Doug isn't objectively wrong until he, lies and cheats and steals, and then I think the Kantian rules start kicking in. But we didn't see any of that in this episode, although I suspect Doug does do that. So the point of watching this episode, and the reason I showed it, is the way I came to watch this episode for the first time was I was at a friend's house, and they were watching this episode. They were watching this show, but as a guilty pleasure. And as I was watching it, I'm like, God, oh my God, these people are just, Doug is just disgusting. Oh, I can't watch this guy. It's super awkward. It's cringy. It's making me feel really uncomfortable. And then I was thinking, why is it that I'm so uncomfortable and find Doug so disgusting? Because he's not lying, cheating, or stealing. He's not hurting people. He's not out there increasing suffering and failing to help people. I mean, what was it in this episode that made me not like him and find him so objectionable? The virtue ethicist is going to say, well, you were just doing ethics. You were just evaluating people and whether their character is good or bad as a human, whether they have good or bad human character, and whether they're succeeding as a human being and living a good human life. As a Kantian, that's not what I think is going on. I think that I was responding to them in sort of subjective, culturally relative way and personal value. I just find Doug a disgusting sort of person I don't want to be around and wouldn't want to be, and wouldn't want my kids to be. So how you respond to these people and whether you take the sort of evaluations we make of these people and their character as objective and as moral failures or successes is going to depend on the moral theory you adopt. If you adopt the utilitarian theory or a Kantian theory, it's really hard to make sense of our evaluations that we naturally make towards these people as moral or objective, and they seem to just turn out to be subjective and culturally relative. If you're a virtue ethicist and you think ethics is about character and succeeding and being successful as a human being and having the sort of successful human life, that you're good at human life, that you have the skill and the maturity and the experiences to navigate human life successfully, and you've been shaped in the right sorts of ways by your experiences and your upbringing to be a success. It seems like David and Bruce have that, and you think that is what morality is about. Well, then, objective morality, then yeah. If you're a virtue ethicist, I think David and Bruce are probably pretty good examples as far as we've seen of the virtuous person, the person who's a successful, good human being. And Doug is a really great example of a morally bad failure as a human being. That's the reason I want you to watch this episode is because I think it provides this nice contrast between what virtue ethicists think morality is about and what the utilitarian and the Kantian think that ethics is about.